don't buy a house on active duty. Don't even think about it. Don't even talk to a VA loan agent. Don't talk to a real estate agent. Don't start shopping comps. Don't buy a house.
Welcome to the Military Money Manual podcast, where every episode is all about achieving financial independence in the military faster than before. We believe personal finance shouldn't be boring or intimidating. Building wealth can be simple, and financial freedom is the ultimate financial goal. Now, here's your hosts, Spencer and Jamie.
Everyone, welcome back to the Military Money Manual podcast. Spencer Reese here from militarymoneymanual.com, joined by my co-host, Jamie. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Spencer.
I'm excited that we get to record another podcast episode together again. We've got over 125 published at the time of this recording. So this is probably going to be like 130 or 135 or something. That's a lot of podcast episodes. So super stoked about that. Today's topic, Jamie, I think is super important. Today is if I had a young airman, a young soldier in my office for an hour and I got to talk to them about personal finance, about investing, about savings, about building wealth while they served in the military and afterwards too, because this is applicable whether you do 1, 2, 3, 4 year term of enlistment or you serve 20 or 30 years. This is all applicable. We recorded an episode specifically for military officers. So if you happen to be on the O side, go listen to that episode. It's just got some specific advice to you. There's no secrets. We're not gatekeeping, the super awesome investing advice for the officers. No, it's basically all the same information. We just wanted to break it into an officer and an enlisted, 2 different episodes so that we can make sure that we get the most applicable and the most relevant advice for you, depending on your status in the military.
Yeah, I think some people will say, like, what do 2 Air Force officers know about enlisted money? It's different. You don't understand our perspective. And while that may be true in a lot of areas, there are a lot of things that are common and some things that we can share that will help. Some of them are practical tips and some of them are just mindset shifts and things like that are going to be helpful for everyone, no matter what stage of your career you're in, officer or enlisted.
Before we get too far in the episode, I just want to put one ask out there for you. If you're listening to this episode on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, can you please leave us a 5-star review? If you've listened this far, you've listened for the minimum 30 seconds. And you can leave us a review, especially on Spotify. We're trying to get 1,000 reviews on Spotify. So if you happen to be listening to us on Spotify, or if you have Spotify, go over there, listen to at least 30 seconds of a podcast, and then give us a 5-star review. And we would really appreciate it. Okay, Jamie, let's jump in. First off, if you're listening to this and you're newly enlisted or you've been enlisted for a while, that's good too. Maybe you're like, you know what? Maybe you're getting married. Maybe you're having a baby. Maybe you're going through a divorce, but maybe you're having some kind of life event that's driving you to think more about money and think more about finances and try to get it right. I mean, I know for me, Jamie, it was graduating pilot training. I could finally take a breath and think about my life. And oh, by the way, I was still living paycheck to paycheck and I have $60,000 in student loan debt. So I was like, I'm sick of this. I don't want to be poor anymore. And so I took action. That's what we want you to do is after listening to this episode, we want you to take action. So first of all, thank you for serving your country. You're doing a great thing for your country, the world, and yourself. In a single enlistment, you can set yourself up for a lifetime of success. You don't need to serve 20 years. A single 4-year enlistment can unlock the post 9/11 GI Bill, pay for your education, set you up for a high-paying, fulfilling career after the military, or you can enjoy a fulfilling career while you're in the military. And Jamie, so much of personal finance and investing, it's not about the numbers. Like people think it's a dollars and cents thing, and it's not. It's about the psychology. It's about the mindset. And so I just wanted to give you an opportunity, is there something that if you had a young airman sitting in front of you right now, what would you want them to start thinking? How would you want them to start approaching money? And what are some like old habits or mindsets that you would like them, myths maybe that you'd like them to break?
I think the biggest thing I would summarize is just you have control over your future finances. And it doesn't matter what you start at your first pay after joining the military. It doesn't matter what your family of origins, socioeconomic status was. It doesn't matter what baggage or habits you are bringing into your adult life or the beginning of your military career. What matters is that you take ownership of it and decide that you are going to build wealth. I know it sounds like easier said than done, but that really is a crucial piece of it And I really liked a couple months ago when we had Devin Daniels from at Knuckle Draggers on Instagram and TikTok. And he really hit that home as like the young enlisted service members. He's an E4 himself and has saved up a good amount of money in his first enlistment so far. But enlisted service members, in his words, have to stop thinking that they don't make enough, and that's the excuse to not saving. So once you take that mindset shift of I can control my future, it comes down to things like spending less than you earn and keeping your expenses low, not taking on extra debt that you don't need. And sometimes it's as simple as keeping up with the Joneses or the peer pressure, like all my buddies in tech school or AIT are getting a new car, so I need a new car too. And I would just challenge you to challenge those beliefs and those assumptions that you have to do things and no one else can make you do something. Those are your decisions and you control your future.
Yeah. And I think part of it, Jamie, is one thing that I just see so often is the tech school marriages. And I know it's great. You're out of your hometown.
You get to move out of the dorms.
Yeah. Cute girl, cute guy for the first time. But oh my goodness, slow it down. Take a breath, get to your first duty, get out of your school, get to your first duty station. And if you're still, you're still into each other, okay, yeah, great, go get married. But my goodness, slow it down. You guys are very excitable. So let's talk about, Jamie, we talked about spending less than you earn. And I think that's where it all begins, right? Like you have to, if your expenses exceed your income, you're poor. And it doesn't matter what income level you're at. I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize that, you could have a NBA athlete out there making 20, 30, $40 million a year. But if they're spending $50 million a year, it doesn't matter that they're making all that money because they're in the hole. They're not wealthy. They're not building wealth because they're spending more than they make. And that's true on the officer side. That's true on the enlisted side. So I think it's really important to just start with that, just fundamental, that whatever your paycheck is, you got to start there. It's kind of like the old saying, like you don't, rise to the occasion, you fall back on the level of your training. In this case, you're falling back on your military paycheck. If you have other sources of income, that's great. But if you don't, whatever you get paid on the 1st and 15th of every month, that's what you have to work with. And now sometimes there's opportunities, to DoorDash or Uber or do other things if you have a lot of free time. But if you've just joined the military and you're listening to this podcast, focus on becoming excellent at your job. That's your job right now. That's why the U.S. taxpayer is paying you. And focus on that and maybe start taking some school. Maybe, there's tons of opportunity with tuition assistance and eventually the GI Bill. Once you've served long enough, you can get an excellent education while you're in the military. And I know plenty of enlisted guys who have gotten bachelor's degrees, gone on to get master's degrees. And I even know enlisted people with PhDs. That's not exactly my cup of tea. I stopped at the bachelor degree and I've worked on a couple graduate certificates, but I know you, Jamie, have gone on and have several master's degrees after graduating university. And so I think that's just, right there is a great opportunity that you can start investing in yourself and building the credentials, especially if you're in a tech job or a cyber job. Man, the military, the government just offers you all these opportunities to get the certifications so that if you do want to leave the military one day, you are set up. Like you probably have a top secret clearance, you have the certifications, and you can go get these jobs that nobody else can get because they don't have the experience and they don't have the credentials that you have.
Okay, Spencer, let's get to some of the practical side of new enlistment information here and the bank account. So we'd like to talk about how you really can keep it pretty simple. Just 2 bank accounts, checking and a high yield savings account. Just need 2 of them.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to say is, whatever you're using for your checking account, I recommend that, let's say that you were part of Podunk University Federal Credit Union in Kansas, and you're super proud of your hometown and there are 3 branches, but you're in the military now. You're in the big leagues. You could be stationed in Italy. You could be stationed in Germany. You could be deployed to the Middle East at the drop of a hat. So you need to be banking with a national, and especially one that has a good app and has a good online system. Typically, Jamie, what I'll recommend to young enlisted service members is a online checking account with USAA, Navy Federal Credit Union, Pentagon Federal, PenFed, Allies, another good bank. And make sure that you are not paying any fees. That is the most critical thing. Like you should either be getting reimbursed for ATM fees or you should have a large enough network that you can find an ATM If people still pull cash out, maybe that's a millennial thing. And then, Schwab is another good one with a good online checking account. But you shouldn't be paying any fees. No maintenance fees, no overdraft fees. Come on, that's so 2005. We're not doing that anymore. There's way too many good banks out there to be paying fees. So what you want to do, so if you haven't, or if you're about to go to boot camp, open up the account before you go, and then you can set up your direct deposit when you get to boot camp, and it'll go from your military pay, from DFAS, Defense Finance Accounting Service, and it'll go straight into your checking account. If you're already enlisted, you can go change your bank account right now on MyPay. So you just, or I think in the Coast Guard, they use PeopleSoft or something. So you can just log on right there, go to DFAS, and you can change your military pay to go into your online checking account. And then once you have that online checking account, the second account that you want to have is a high yield savings account. And so there's a bunch of options out there, and it's going to change. So by the time you listen to this, but your best friend is just going to an online search engine, Google or Bing, and search for high yield savings accounts. And right now, some of the best out there are American Express, Marcus, I think it's a Goldman Sachs product, Vanguard Cash Plus, that's over at Vanguard.com. Capital One has one, and Schwab also has a money market fund that you can invest in over there. So just make sure it's FDIC insured. So that's the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. They're basically the government entity that backs up our banks. And yeah, that's it. Just a checking account, you pay all your bills out of that, and a savings account for any excess cash that you have laying around. That's how I would advise someone to set up their banking.
Yeah, speaking of no fees, you want to make sure you have access to a debit card. And Spencer and I recommend using a debit card only initially. There should be no fees to use your debit card, or no minimum number of transactions per month, or any of those kind of gotchas that some people fall prey to. And a lot of times those come from you're just an established relationship with that bank from your hometown, like Spencer mentioned. I don't want to call out any particular states like Spencer did, but you're just kind of set with the bank that you grew up with. And so you bring in a lot of fees to your military pay, which is not a requirement. But start out with debit card only. You don't need to get an Amex Platinum right away. And even though we do like to talk about credit cards and the benefits that come with that, especially for our newer enlisted service members, debit card only. Track your spending that way. We'll talk more about that in a second, but it's very easy to make sure you don't overspend when you're with a debit card. As you're getting used to life, you don't need to go after premium credit cards. Start with a debit card only. And then Spencer, when might they start looking at expanding beyond debit cards?
My recommendation would be 6 to 12 months probably after you've kind of got to your first base and you've got settled. I think the most important thing is you understand what your expenses are. Because when you have a debit card, it's very easy to see, my bank account has $100 left in it and I have to buy gas. Well, that's $50 and I have to buy groceries. That's $40 and I'm going to have $10 left over. And it's the 29th of the month and I'm getting paid tomorrow, but it's going to be tight, right? So you want to get away from that situation when you're living paycheck to paycheck. And a debit card actually helps you to see, okay, like how much money am I actually spending? Kind of in this vein too, Jamie, it might be beneficial to start tracking your spending. And there's a whole bunch of different free apps out there and programs. You like YNAB, YNAB as a spending tracking. I use Monarch Money, which I think is $100 a year. There's Rocket Dollar, there's Every Dollar. There's so many free tracking apps out there. As long as they have a decent number, 1,000 plus, 10,000 plus reviews, they're pretty safe. And all they're doing is pulling the data, the transaction data out of your account. They can't actually move any money around. So I would recommend that if someone is interested, they start keeping track. But a lot of the banks, you can look at your spending as well. You can just look at your checking account statement and you can add it up. And if you really want to get fancy, you can use Excel or Google Sheets. But I think starting to track your spending and understand and build those habits of like you're saving with every paycheck and you're not living paycheck to paycheck. I think, that's something that YNAB really pushes is aging your dollars, right? So eventually you're not spending the money that just came in 2 days ago with your paycheck. You're spending the paycheck 2 months ago. And so you have this margin of safety, which really helps give you peace and gives you stability and gives you security. Because you know that if you do have a big unexpected expense, you can cover it. And you know that your day-to-day life expenses, it's not going to overdraft your checking account. So I think once you've got that margin of safety, then you can start looking at a credit card, I would recommend a no annual fee credit card to start to build your credit score. You might need to get a secured card. So basically what that would be is you would deposit $500 into a savings account. Let's say at USAA, they offer a secured card. So does Navy Federal, both great military-friendly banks. You deposit and this is assuming you have no credit score whatsoever, which is quite common if you're 18, 19, 20 years old and you just joined the military. And you put $500 in there, and that is basically your insurance, your deposit that you're going to pay. You're going to make payments, and just get a no annual fee credit card, set it up for automatic payments from your checking account. But every time you get the statements emailed to you, make sure that you log in, review your statement, make sure there's no fraudulent charges on there, and then pay it off completely. That's the most important thing. You have to pay it off completely. So every time you receive a statement, whatever the statement balance is, the total balance for the previous statement, the previous month's statement, you must pay that in full. And if you do that, you'll pay no interest. And I think that's what's a lot of times, Dave Ramsey, God bless him, people get confused and they think as soon as you swipe your credit card, you're going to start charging interest. No, I have never paid a dime in interest my entire life, using credit cards for over 20 years now. And that's because I pay it in full as soon as I get the bill. So if you're going to start spending, use a debit card. And then eventually, once you've got a hold on your spending, a no annual fee credit card. And then if you're like super motivated and you want to start travel hacking, I got a whole course about that at militarymoneymanual.com/UMC3. But hold off on all that until you get a good grasp on your finances. And Jamie, I think kind of that margin of safety that I've been talking about, another name for it might be an emergency fund. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the ways that you can avoid falling into the trap of credit card debt or overspending is by having an emergency fund. So basically what that means is it's a stockpile of cash, i.e. money in your bank account. We're not talking about cash under the mattress in your dorm room, but a separate bank account where the money's separate from your normal spending, or some banks allow you to have separate buckets in your high yield savings account, but you have money set aside specifically for emergencies. And once you have that money set aside, you'll find that stuff no longer is an emergency as much. So that extra TDY voucher that's a little bit delayed, or your BAH isn't caught up when you move out of the dorms for the first time, it's not as much of a deal when you have some money set aside. A lot of financial advice recommends $1,000 as a starter emergency fund. And that's a really good benchmark. If you want to do a little bit more, that's fine. But $1,000 initially will have you able to pay for a plane ticket home at the last minute, an emergency car repair. Your paycheck gets messed up because the military said you owe a debt that you don't really owe. And then once you get that solidified, you can bump it up to more of the 3 to 6 months of your expenses amount. You can grow it to a level that helps you sleep well at night later, but initially $1,000 emergency fund will help protect and give that margin of safety there. So you're not falling into the trap of needing to swipe a credit card for every bill that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, it's amazing. Once you have that emergency fund, once you have that margin of safety, things just aren't stressful anymore. Like, you just have less emergencies in your life when you have the money there to cover it. And I think that is just so powerful and just so important for people to recognize that once you've got this money saved up, you're really liberated.
And I totally understand $1,000 may seem like a really overwhelming amount of money to save. You may never have had more than $27 in your bank account before. And I understand what that feels like. When my wife and I got married and shortly after I commissioned, we had $118,000 in debt, partial student loans, partial credit cards, partial personal loans. And we have an episode where we talk about that in more detail. But the feeling of not having any money and not knowing how I'll ever save anything up is real. And I remember that feeling. It could be as simple as $50 a month or $25 a month just to start with some savings goal. And then as you figure out your expenses and exactly how much it costs to live in your base, in your city, in your job, and having the uniforms and how much you're going to be able to eat at the dining facility or not, eventually that'll settle out after a couple months. And then you'll be able to really crack down if you'd like to and be a little more aggressive on your emergency savings. But just start with putting maybe $25 a month aside for now. And then eventually you can get to maybe where you're saving $100 or $200 a month. It doesn't have to be that you get $1,000 this month. You're just going to slowly work up to that amount. So don't be overwhelmed by that.
All right, Jamie. So We've just talked about the mindset. We've talked about spending less than you earn, setting up the right bank account system where you have an online checking account, a high yield savings account. We talked about using a debit card only initially, and then a no annual fee credit card. Emergency fund, $1,000, I think is still, I know inflation has eroded the power of a dollar since, Dave Ramsey started preaching the baby steps and the $1,000 emergency fund decades ago, but it still works. I mean, it's better. You're better having $1,000 than $0, that's for sure. So let's talk about first car. This is a very common expense that a lot of young enlisted encounter, where maybe they didn't have a car or they were using their parents' car when they were in high school. Maybe they do have their own car, but maybe now they're getting stationed overseas and it's a left-hand drive country. And so they're not going to be able to, ship their American car over there. Let's talk about buying your first car. So I think the first step here, Jamie, is to evaluate if you even need a car. And a lot of times you're not going to know that until you get to your first base. And it's going to depend. A lot of the overseas bases, I know in Osan, Korea, and some of the Japanese bases, I mean, you can get around just fine on either a bike or a moped or a scooter of some kind. And that's a great option. I mean, especially if you've got the cold weather gear when it's winter, but I think it's an excellent option and you can save a ton of money and then you have money for other things. Now, if you're a car guy, that's a different story because we're talking about, like an entertainment, a hobby expense versus just the utility of how do you get yourself from point A to point B. Now, that being said, don't be that guy or gal that if you're on a base, like in the middle of Montana or Wyoming, and you do need a car, don't be the person who's like always scamming rides from people. Like, go get yourself a car. There's plenty of excellent used cars out there under $10,000. I usually recommend a Japanese or Korean brand, Kia, Honda, Toyota, Mazda, any of those. If you want to get super nerdy about it, this is what I did: is I checked Consumer Reports. I paid $20 or $30, whatever it was, for a year's digital subscription. And I looked at the reliability ratings of the used cars from the year that I was looking. And that's how I ended up picking my first used car. I would say the number one killer of wealth in America is buying too much car. And that is, you see it, the meme of the young Marine who goes out and buys the Dodge Charger with a 28% interest loan. And just like now they're making $1,000 payments for the rest of their enlistment. And they get to the end of their enlistment and the car's not worth anything. And they still have this debt and they don't have any money saved. I mean, it's a meme because it happens. It happens every single day. And it doesn't matter how many podcast episodes we put out. It's still going to keep happening. But if you're listening to this, it doesn't have to happen to you. So like Jamie said in the beginning about the mindset thing, you can choose to not sign up for that absolutely terrible plan. I would recommend don't buy a truck, don't lease, never lease, and check the lemon lot on base. There's a lot of times there's some good deals there. And if you're selling from military member to military member, it just takes a little bit of friction out of the transaction. I mean, there's so many like Carvana and like all the different ways that you can purchase a used car these days. And it's not the middle of COVID anymore where like used cars were being sold for more than new cars. It's a much more normal market and there's plenty of options out there. And I would say, $10,000 would be the absolute limit.
That's a big one to make sure you get right for sure. Another one is tracking your common expenses, things like cell phones, internet, computer, entertainment, bars on the weekends out, things like that. They really add up. So you want to make sure, like maybe it's you stay on your family plan with your parents, your brother or sister for a little bit. Maybe you share a Wi-Fi router with your dorm mate or something like that. You don't necessarily need to buy everything on your own, and you don't necessarily need the top tier of everything right now. This is sometimes as simple as a temporary sacrifice, if you will, or temporary decision to be careful with how much you spend, to not go out with your friends every time they go to the bar and they're paying, $12, $14 per drink plus tip. It just really adds up and it's going to really impact your future wealth building capabilities if you're overspending and you're just getting bled out by the little paper cuts one at a time until you have no money left over to save at the end of the month.
I will say though, Jamie, if you're young and you're stationed overseas and your buddies are going out on the weekend, don't sit at home in your dorm. Come on.
Not every time. Sometimes.
Yeah, not every time. Yeah, not every time. You don't have to say yes every time, but I would advise that you say yes more often than not. And if you set up, like if you don't buy the truck and you're not making $1,000 payments on your car, you're going to have the flexibility in your income to be able to afford the things that you want to do with the people that you want to do it with.
Yeah. It's about what matters to you. If you value going out with your friends and being there all the time, then maybe you have to sacrifice on the car or on the top tier, newest iPhone, whatever's out now. And if that doesn't matter to you, then maybe you invest. But there's a balance here with everything. What I would be careful with is taking out debt to make the friendships happen, to the trips happen or whatever. Maybe there's ways you can hang out and do a hike that doesn't cost any money and still get that quality time in the friendship and the exploring wherever you're stationed without having it to all cost money every time. But I do agree with Spencer. Enjoy it while you're young. Just make sure you balance it out sometimes. If you want to go as far as setting up a fully automated conscious spending plan, then that's a really good idea. And Spencer and I would definitely recommend that. What that means might sound a little fuzzy to you, but it's basically just you set a savings rate for financial independence. Maybe it's 5, 10, maybe up to 25% or more if you're hard charging like that, which would be great. And then you can spend the rest of it guilt-free. You can do a more detailed budget, but that's a very simple way, the technique that Spencer uses. You just set the savings rate and then don't worry about the rest. What you want to avoid doing is spending all your money and then saving whatever's left over at the end of the month, because you'll find more often than not, nothing's left over at the end of the month if you don't pay yourself first.
Okay, let's talk about the thrift savings plan, Jamie, the TSP. So lucky for all new enlisted since 2018, their TSP is pretty much good to go. I mean, you're going to be automatically opted in, I think pretty soon, if not this year, then within the next couple of years, it's going to be a 5% automatic contribution on the service member's part. And once you've been in 60 days, the United States government is going to start throwing in a 1% automatic contribution. So now you're at 6%. You're only doing 5%, but you're getting 6% of your pay into there. And then after 2 years, you're going to start receiving the full match, which means for every 5% you put in, up to 5%, the United States government is going to throw in 5%. So that right there, if you're throwing in 5% to your TSP and the government's matching you 5%, you're literally doubling your money with no risk. And it's a 5% pay bump. So if you're making $60,000 a year, oh shoot, now I have to do math in public. That's a it's a $300 pay bump right there. It's fantastic that they set the TSP up this way. Also, they've transitioned from where everybody was automatically in the G fund, the government bond fund. They've transitioned to everyone's in a life cycle fund that's most appropriate or based on when they enter the service. So right now, for new enlisted coming in, you're in the L2065 fund. So that's the life cycle 2065 fund. And we've got a couple podcast episodes. You can deep dive into what the life cycle funds are, what the TSP funds are. But yeah, just know this. Just when you do get access to your MyPay, log in there, make sure that you're sending 5% of your pay to the Roth TSP. That's ROTH. So there's two flavors of the TSP, or two types of accounts inside. If you think of the TSP as like a big bucket, inside that are two water balloons. One water balloon is called the traditional TSP. The other water balloon is called the Roth TSP. And yeah, you want to make sure that you are contributing 5% to your Roth TSP. If you've been contributing 5% to your traditional TSP, it's not that big of a deal. Don't worry about it too much. But if you are listening to this podcast, I assume that you want to optimize your finances, and the optimal thing to do would be to contribute 5% to your Roth TSP. There's several episodes out there and tons of articles that explain the why behind this, but we're not going to get into it in this episode. L2065, make sure that once you're contributing to your TSP through MyPay, go to tsp.gov. So it's Tango Sierra Papa.gov. And the first time you create an account, they're going to physically mail you your password. Yes, 1950s called. It is the most archaic system ever invented, but this is the way they do it. So make sure that whatever address you have in MyPay is an address that you can safely receive mail at. So that might be your parents, your grandparents' address, a friend that you trust back home. It might be your APO box in Italy or FPO box in Okinawa. And that's okay. The letter will get there eventually. It just might take a while. And then once you get that letter, you can go and set up your TSP account, and you can use a normal password I think you have to set up a 2-factor authentication with either text message. I think they're only using text message right now. And then once you're logged into your TSP.gov account, you can look at your investment options and you can make sure that you're in the L2065 fund. In a couple of years, it'll be the L2070 fund. And that's it. That's all you have to do really for your TSP.
All right, Spencer, I'm confused. What's the TSP and how do I learn more about this? I don't even understand what a TSP is if I'm new to the military sometimes.
That's true. So we've got episode number 2 on the podcast. It's our most popular episode ever. And it's all about the TSP, the Thrift Savings Plan, TSP. Yeah, go listen to episode number 2. It's the most popular episode. We break down the TSP. And also, if you search through our episodes, we've got tons of episodes about the different funds that you can invest in, the best TSP investing strategy. Oh, and we've even got a course, militarymoneymanual.com/TSP, and it is 100% free to an E4 and below. So if you're enlisted and you're an E4 or below, and you want to get access to the course, you can email us, TSP Tango Sierra Papa at militarymoneymanual.com. And we will give you that course. It's video. It's great. Jamie and I talk about different TSP investing strategies and the different funds, and we break it all down and make it super simple. And that's if you're an E4 or below, it's free. And if you're not an E4 or below, you can use promo code podcast and you can get, I think it's $50 off. It's a pretty good discount. So yeah, Jamie, the Thrift Savings Plan, the TSP, is the government's version of a 401k, which basically is a retirement savings plan. It's a employer retirement savings plan. So it's set up by your employer, in this case, the United States military, and it allows you to save for retirement in a tax-advantaged way. Again, that's getting super complicated. We don't need to get into that today, but just know that if like you've ever heard of investing or buying stocks and bonds or becoming wealthy through the stock market, this is it. This is literally your opportunity, because inside that L2065 fund, you are buying every publicly traded company in America and thousands of foreign companies, and you're getting some nice government bonds and some corporate bonds. And yeah, it's a fantastic investment vehicle that unfortunately not a lot of people understand, but that's why we've put out a lot of content about it. And we've got the course, the Confident TSP Investing course, militarymoneymanual.com/TSP. And the promo code, again, is podcast24. I think I said podcast earlier, but it's promo code podcast24.
So Spencer, 2 ways to save for future self. This is retirement age, like 59 and a half or later. You have the TSP, which is the employer-sponsored plan that you talked about. And another one that young service members may hear about, or new enlisted service members may hear about, is a Roth IRA. So an IRA is an individual retirement arrangement or individual retirement account. And that is another way to save for retirement that is future you benefits. One thing that's different about the individual IRA is that it's a smaller limit, like $7,000 this year in 2024. And really for a new service member, you don't really have to worry about it right now, but unless you're really gung-ho on it, you can work on that after you start setting up all the other things you have in motion. But over the next couple months, 6 months, 12 months or so, you're going to want to come back, open up a Roth IRA, and then start contributing to that.
Okay, Jamie, just a couple more topics that I want to let the young enlisted know about, and that's insurance. Your insurance needs when you're in the active duty service are pretty minimal. And a lot of, like the life insurance piece is actually covered by SGLI. So that's the Service Members Group Life Insurance Policy. And that's $500,000. That's $500,000 a year. It's very reasonably priced. They just take it out of your paycheck. Is it under $30 still?
$31, I think, for that max amount.
$31. Okay. So there you go. Yeah, very reasonably priced, and you don't have to get like any medical exam or anything for it. It's an example of term life insurance. We are big fans of term life insurance policies on this podcast, not whole life insurance policies. And if you hear a financial advisor, quote unquote, who wants to sell you or offer you a whole life insurance policy, run away very quickly and send us an email, podcast@militarymoneymanual.com. We'd love to hear about your horror story and maybe feature you on the podcast. But it's term life insurance for the SGLI. And then your only other coverages that you need, Jamie, is auto insurance if you have a car, and then renter's insurance if you're living in the dorms.
Yeah, just be careful with anything. Like Spencer mentioned, you're going to get a lot of people come into base to your unit, and a lot of times they're trying to sell you things. If you don't understand it and they're not willing to describe it to you in a way that you can understand it, that's a pretty good rule of thumb that you shouldn't be buying into it. Whole life insurance is probably something that 99.99999% of enlisted service members don't need, especially if you're new. So just be really careful with those organizations, even though they're nonprofit, coming on base and trying to sell you something. There's always a reason, there's always an angle, and a lot of times it's a very high commission rate that those people will get. The other thing I want to mention is make sure that even though you may not have a high net worth yet or a lot of money or a lot of assets, it's still very important that you set up your beneficiaries for your SGLI, for the service members group life insurance, and that you go to JAG, to the lawyers on base, and get a basic will, power of attorney, and advanced medical directive, especially on the medical directive side, if there's specific care that you want and who to designate to make those medical decisions for you should something happen. Unfortunately, we see young service members and single service members pass away or get killed in the line of duty all the time that don't have everything aligned well. So whether it's to your parents or a sibling or a cousin or a girlfriend or a partner, boyfriend, like whoever you want to designate, make sure that it's who you want and that it's set up properly. It's easy for your family to deal with your personal possessions and the life insurance payout or whatever else comes in the midst of their grieving. The last thing you want to make them do should something happen, and again, none of us ever think that it's going to be our time anytime soon. We're too young or whatever, but it does happen. Get a basic will from the JAG on base. It's free. It costs you nothing more than a couple hours of your time to fill out the paperwork.
If you're lucky enough to get stationed overseas, there's lots of apps now that are much easier to transfer money than any of the kind of junky products that they've been using over there for a long time. So I like the Wise, W-I-S-E, the Wise app. They do safe and cheap international currency conversion. So what you do is you connect your US bank account to Wise, and then you can actually open a local bank account just in the Wise app and then make payments out of it in the local currency. So if you have a rent payment or a utilities that you have to pay or any kind of those other expenses that you have when you're living overseas and you need to pay in euros or yen or pounds, the Wise app is definitely a easy way to do it. And the currency conversion fees are very reasonable, and it converts at exactly the spot price, like the real conversion rate. So you don't have to worry about that. And then you just pay their small fees, which are quite reasonable even for large transfers. A couple other things I want to address before we wrap up here. Cybersecurity, make sure you enable two-factor authentication on everything. I know it's annoying, especially if you like work in a vault or in a secret area and you run outside to grab your phone. If they send you a text message. But definitely like for all your banking stuff, and a lot of times you're being forced to do this anyways, but for all your banking stuff, for all your money stuff, enable the two-factor authentication. Make yourself a hard target, and usually the digital thieves will just move on to somebody who's easier. Use a password manager. I think those are another really good tool. So like Google Chrome just has a password manager built in. I think Apple does as well, Jamie. I don't have an iPhone, so
I'm not telling if I use it or not. I don't want you to try to hack it, but there are a couple options out there. Yeah.
Yeah. LastPass, 1Password, there's a couple of those apps as well you can pay for, but I find the free ones are fine. Like the one built into Google Chrome. My whole life is on Google. And so that's cybersecurity. And then I guess the last thing I want to talk about, Jamie, is buying a house on active duty. Now, you've been a little bit softer on this position, but I'm starting to take a very firm line on this. And the Spencer policy right now is don't buy a house on active duty. Don't even think about it. Don't even talk to a VA loan agent. Don't talk to a real estate agent. Don't start shopping comps. Don't buy a house on active duty. Now, that being said, someone's going to be like, I love buying houses. I want to be a landlord. Okay, that's great. You go buy a house. But for everybody else out there, if you were born and you were like, man, I can't wait to own a house. I am so excited to be a long distance landlord. I'm so excited to take phone calls at 2 a.m. to go fix toilets or to set up my little monopoly real estate empire. If that's you, go buy a house. That's fine. But if that's not you, don't buy a house on active duty. You're going to be moving so often. it is such a huge risk. And I'm seeing it right now, Jamie, when on Reddit, where people are asking questions about, hey, can I stop making my mortgage payments if I got PCS orders? No, you can't. You bought that house. You owe the bank money. If you don't make your mortgage payments, the bank will take the house back, tank your credit, and it'll be terrible for you. It's recoverable. Like, you're not going to die, but like, it is really bad for your financial future if you get yourself in that situation. But there's an easy way to stay out of that situation, and that's don't buy a house, rent. There are always great rental markets around every military base because there's a ton of people that need to rent because they're only there for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. Now, on the enlisted side, it's not as, especially like in the Air Force, it's not as bad as the officer side where like we're getting moved every 2 to 3 years. But that being said, like, it's very, very uncommon to meet anybody in the military who's been stationed anywhere for, I don't know, 10 years, longer than 10 years, I would say. That would be really pushing it even in the enlisted level. So this gets back to the mindset thing, Jamie, but rent is not throwing money away. People love to throw that out there. It's weird because they don't say that buying groceries is throwing money away. They don't say that buying a car is throwing money away. No, rent is not throwing money away. You need a place to lay your head at night. You need a roof over your head. And so you must pay someone to acquire that. If you're out of the military and you know you're going to live in Michigan for the rest of your life because your family's there and your spouse is there and your kids are there and your school's there and your job's there, yeah, go buy a house. But while you're on active duty, while you could literally be moved from Hawaii to Japan to England to Africa to an embassy somewhere in South America with very, very little notice, don't add stress to your life. Your life is going to be stressful enough as it is. And especially because this episode is targeted at young enlisted service members. So let your landlord assume the risk. You're going to be moving, like we said, every 2, 3, 4 years. You have no idea what the future holds. Don't buy a house on active duty. Wait till afterwards. And another thing we like to talk about, Jamie, is when you're comparison shopping and you're like, hey, the mortgage I could get on this place was $1,500 a month, but my rent's $2,000 a month. Man, I could be saving $500 a month. You are not factoring all the costs. The mortgage, the principal and interest is the minimum you're going to pay every month. Rent is the maximum you're going to pay every month. What I do is when I look at the mortgage, the principal plus interest payments, I add 50% on top of that number to start factoring in all the maintenance costs, all the taxes, the homeowners association, all the random things, all the random fees and fines. Houses are literal money pits. And unless you have a lot of money that you want to start chucking into a money pit, don't buy a house. Do not buy a house on active duty. Okay. Now with that Spencer rant complete, Jamie, would you like to offer a more nuanced perspective?
I don't. Just make good decisions and make sure that you're making smart decisions that make sense to you. You've run the numbers, ignore the news and the hype and like what the friend in the squadron or in your unit that's doing on Robinhood or, you know, all the fads that are out there. It's very simple to build wealth. It's starting early and investing early and often, not overspending. Like our friend Jeremy Schneider, Personal Finance Club, likes to say, spend less than you earn and invest the difference. And that starts now for you, especially if you're a young and especially if you're enlisted service member. It just takes small contributions automatically over time. And when you read Personal Finance Club on Instagram or Spencer's book, The Military Money Manual, you listen to episodes, the podcasts like ours, or the TSP course that Spencer mentioned earlier, you're going to accumulate knowledge. And that knowledge is going to turn into motivation to build wealth and set up what you are passionate about in life. It's not like what I care about or what Spencer cares about. It's what do you want? And for most people, if they really dig into it, they want time or travel or options or a house on the beach. Most people aren't out there thinking like, I really want to be working 14-hour days when I'm 69 and a half. Very, very, very few people start out thinking that. It's our culture that sells you that lie, that that's the only way to be successful. And as you're starting out your career, I just really encourage you to define what success means for you, whether that's 20 years or 4 years or somewhere in between or more than 20, that's fine. But you can control your destiny, and working towards financial independence doesn't have to be painful. It just needs to be deliberate and prioritized. There's a little Jamie Rant for you.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, Jamie. Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back to the show.
Hey, Spencer, I got a cousin that just graduated from high school and they're about to start basic training in a few months. Any ideas on a gift I should get him?
Yep, sure do, Jamie. The Military Money Manual, A Practical Guide to Financial Freedom, is a concise, easy to read, and practical guide to your military money. It's the book that I wish someone had handed me on my first day in the military. In the book, I explain the exact money tactics and investing strategies that can enable you to achieve financial independence while serving in the U.S. military. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and my website. It's hardcover, paperback, ebook, Kindle, and audiobook. You can get a special discount using promo code podcast on my website, shop.militarymoneymanual.com. I think that, one thing we didn't talk about in this podcast is like, what's the why? Like, why bother doing all this? Like we said, like getting rich, getting wealthy, but it really comes down to financial independence. It's using money to solve your money problem. And then once you're financially independent, you have time freedom. You have job freedom. You don't have to work at a job that you don't want to. You don't have to live in a place you don't want to because you've liberated yourself because you have financial freedom. You have financial independence. And that's a topic that we really haven't addressed in this. We've gotten to the nitty gritty details, the technical details of like, how do you actually set up your money? But one thing that we haven't really talked about is the why. And I think for me, and when I was in the military and when I talked to young enlisted service members that I worked with, it was, I wanted to light that fire, pun intended, of financial independence and retiring early. And maybe right now you're like, this is my first job. Like I just joined the military. I'm not thinking about retiring early. It's like, okay, that's fine. But I want you to be thinking about the financial independence part, because when you have money, when you have savings, when you have investments, when you have, investments that cash flow, and that like last year, I made the most money from dividends that I have in any year previously. And that's just from, the standard Vanguard ETFs that we talk about. So at the end of the day, what we want you to do is dream big, set ambitious goals, and build the life you want, and then save for it and eventually achieve financial independence. And you can do that on an enlisted salary. I just saw 2 posts today on Reddit where guys are within a couple years of retiring on the enlisted side, and they're millionaires. They have over $1 million of liquid savings. So one of them wasn't even counting their house equity. So that right there is just amazing. And it shows that it is possible and that you can do it. And so much of it is a mindset. It's a mindset thing. And if you are exposed to this information and you surround yourself with the people that encourage a positive, growth-oriented mindset, it's amazing what you can achieve. And then if you do the opposite, it's no wonder that you don't achieve anything. And you can do that through podcasts. I mean, you can go listen to all of our podcasts, and I guarantee that you'll probably know a thing or two more than your peers, more than your friends, about money and about investing and about growing real wealth. I'm not talking here about cryptocurrency scams. I'm not talking here about real estate scams. I'm not talking here about whole life insurance, TikTok scams. I'm talking about like actual money in the bank, actual wealth. And I think so many people get distracted by the get rich quick schemes, and they don't focus on what's actually important, which is spending less than you earn, investing early and often. And that's about it. I mean, it really does come down to that. I hope this is valuable for you. If you got any questions, Jamie and I are podcast at militarymoneymanual.com. You can email us there, or you can DM us on Instagram at Military Money Manual. Love getting the DMs, hearing from readers and listeners. It's fantastic. We've got the website, militarymoneymanual.com. I've got my book. It's also called The Military Money Manual. I can't make it any simpler. It's on Amazon. It's on Libby too, so you can get it for free from the DoD libraries. I highly encourage you to check it out there. If you're deployed, shoot me an email, podcast at militarymoneymanual.com. I would love to send your deployed unit a couple copies for free, 100% free, of my book. Get those conversations started while you're on deployment. And you have an awesome opportunity here. I'm super excited. If you listen to this entire podcast, you're going to do great. Leave us a review, Spotify, Apple, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Military Money Manual podcast.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
The views and opinions presented here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of the DoD or its components. Reference to any commercial products or services does not constitute DoD endorsement of those products or services.